Tuatahi tēnei mi nei ki a tātou I ara mai ki tēnei whare ko te wharawaka I tēnei rā. Nore nau mai, para mai whakatau mai rā. Ka tika huria ki mihi ki ngā maunga whakahi o te rohe nei, te whakanui a tara, ki nā koutou. Me ngā awa e whakapāna tēnei mōna nui a kiwa nore rā, tēnā kōrero o tira tēnā koutou. Kāti, ki a koe e pita. Tēnei mi nei ki a koe I tēnei ata, no te mea ki tara mai koe ki te whakarongo ki tēnei kōrero pakapaku no reira. Me mahana ki a koe e heka no te mea ko koe te waiwai tapu o tēnei whenua. Hara mai ki te whakarongo ki tēnei tangi wetu o Ngāti Praupia. No e heka tēnā koe. Kāti, e ngā manuheri o ngā hau e whā nau mai whakatau mai rā ki tēnei hui. Good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this hui today. My name is Mahanga Maru. I used to be Donovan Clark, but he left. So I work with Superu, with Claire and the team as the Chief Māori Advisor. So very warm welcome to you all on a unique Wellington morning. No wind, the sea's calm. And we have two wonderful guests from Auckland about to join us. You might notice that a gentleman just left the room. So he's one of the kaumātua actually from Taranaki Whānui. So I acknowledge Peter being here this morning, which is really quite nice. Welcome to you all. I'd like to introduce to you my Chief Executive, Claire Ward. Kia ora.
Thank you, Donovan. God, now you've got me calling you Donovan. Thank you, Mahanga. Tēnā koutou katoa. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here today, and we're gathering to find out more about the children of New Zealand at age 4, as we learn from the Growing Up in New Zealand study. The options that children have are influenced by the aspirations of our society and those who look after them and care for them, and their aspirations for those children as well. And so the knowledge we gain from growing up in New Zealand provides a window on what's going on and how we can understand more about the part that we can play in that. So it's really important that we do understand. But there's a lot we can learn about this group of children. And so Susan and Sarah are going to give us a little window today of the first things that we're finding out about age 4. But as a country, we need to know a lot more. And at Superu, we manage the contract for Growing Up in New Zealand with the Growing Up in New Zealand team. And we also have this year put aside a fund of nearly $1 million to actually fund research on this really valuable data so that we actually start to... I'm sure that at the end of this session you'll have lots of questions. Well, how does that link to this? I wonder what happens there. The research fund really allows us to really explore some of those questions in more detail. We're just at the stage of signing up the first contracts around that, so we hope to be in the next wee while to be, over the next year to be able to share more results on that and then have more funding, more research going as well. Because what we're discovering about these children is actually a gift to New Zealand, and it's our job, I think, to make sure that we make the most of that gift. So on behalf of Superu, as I say, we manage the contract. I'd like to acknowledge the energy and expertise of Susan and her team and the University of Auckland more generally, but also thank the children and the families for the information that they share with us so that we can be thinking about these things. So that's probably enough from me. I just wanted to introduce Susan Morton, who is going to be talking today, and also her colleague, Dr. Sarah Barry. I have lots of notes here, but I think I might just not read all those out because rather than listening to me about who they are, I'm sure you want to listen to them talk about the children of New Zealand. So Susan and Sarah, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Tato, and thank you very much, Claire and Mahana, for that lovely welcome. And it's really a pleasure to be here. As Claire said, it's always such a privilege to stand in front of a group of people and share the collective stories of the families and the children who are part of this amazing cohort. And It's really exciting to have got to their 4-year opportunity to share where things have gone in the preschool period, and we hope to share the early insights into their 4-year journey with you today. And I'm really pleased that Sarah is here with me. She'll be providing a lot of the detail. She's been a key person in managing this report, and also the rest of the team who are here, Caroline and Lisa, who are here, who've absolutely contributed to the report too, and also Annie, our General Manager, and thank you to Superu for all your support along the way as well. So it's great to be here and great to see such a lovely group of people. So we will allow time at the end for questions, but if Sarah or I say anything that's totally stupid, then please feel free to put your hand up and ask for clarification, but we will provide time to have questions at the end. Just in terms of how we plan to run today, is I'm just going to introduce where we're at, where we've got to, how we've got to the children being 4 years old, and give you a bit of context about the cohort, so that when you hear the results, you can put them into the context of what we're actually doing here with looking at these children's development. Then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sarah, who's going to give you the real meat, if you like, of the story at 4 years, and tell you some of the things that are emerging from looking at this exciting data from the whole preschool period. And then we'll wrap up with just sort of a where to next and how you can engage, as you've heard a little bit from Claire, and just talk about some of the exciting things that are coming up. So that's the plan, and we'll see how we go. We aim to speak for about 45 or maybe 50 minutes, and we'll leave time for people to ask questions. So that's the plan from here on. So just a little bit of a background, just because when we present anything like this on the cohort, it's really important to understand where these findings are coming from. So this is a cohort of children who were recruited in pregnancy. 6,853 children were recruited via their pregnant mums. And we also recruited their dads or their mothers' partners in pregnancy as well. And we got slightly less of those dads initially, but we have run a subsequent follow-up called Who Are Today's Dads, or WATD, as you see it on that slide. We have actually followed up a few more of the dads in the last couple of years as well, so that's very exciting. So it's quite unique to have both the voices of mums and dads contributing information. And the thing that's really exciting now, of course, is the opportunity to engage the voices of the children themselves as they get old enough to tell us their own stories. One of the things that makes this cohort really valuable, both at the age of 4, but also generally, is the diversity and the size of the cohort. So importantly, we're able to look at trajectories of development for our Māori children. So 1 in 4 of the cohort are Māori. We can also look at trajectories for Pacific. 1 in 5 of the children identify as Pacific. 1 in 6 identify as Asian, and we know that those last 2 groups are extremely heterogeneous, but we can still look at that group as a group, and sometimes we can look at subgroups within that. And actually by 4 years, we can also look at multiple ethnicities, which is really important, and almost half the children by the age of 4 are identifying with 2 or more ethnic groups. Now, when I say identifying, that's the parents who've identified them so far. So one of the interesting things going forward is going to be looking at how the children actually identify themselves, because mums and dads don't always agree, which is probably no great surprise to anybody in the audience. So when we think about what are we doing it for, how can this preschool information, this collection of information help? Well, it's contributing to the overarching aim of what we're trying to achieve in this study, which is to track the developmental trajectories and understand what shapes those trajectories for all of our diverse children who are growing up in New Zealand today in the 21st century. So this is a study that actually has a long history, even though the children are only in their early childhood. This was actually a study that was conceived by multiple government agencies, actually way back in the mid-90s. But it always takes a while, long gestation period, to get these things off the ground. So it's wonderful to start to see the results coming out. When we think about child development for this group of children, we're thinking about it in this sort of life course way. So the child is at the centre of everything that we're thinking about, and whenever we go and measure how they're doing, the children are our focus, and they are the cohort. But around them, of course, are multiple layers of influences on their development, starting with their immediate family, and then heading all the way out from informal to formal society and policy as well. So we're constantly interested in measuring this dynamic interaction that children have with their environment, and also dynamic as in measuring the changes over time. One of the great advantages of a longitudinal study is not just taking a snapshot, but actually being able to see how things are changing as the children grow up. And not just for the children, but for the environments around them. So That's the sort of framework that sits behind everything that we do, and when we look at a particular release, in this case the 4-year-old, we're thinking about it in the context of the whole pathway of development for these children from pre-birth onwards. So when we think about what we're going to present on today, the preschool period and the longitudinal information, here's just a little infographic that just describes where we're at. So we started in pregnancy, we've had face-to-face interviews with mums and the mum's partner, 99% of whom said they were the biological dad in pregnancy. And then we've had multiple occasions to see mums and dads again when the children were 9 months old and when they were 2. We've also had multiple times to engage with them in between to retain the cohort. That's really important. And retention rates have been very high, well over 90% for each data collection wave. So that's important too in terms of the robustness of the results. And importantly, we've linked to routine data where we're able to with consent from the parents. And that's something we're going to do more of as we go forward, because adding the depth, if you like, from the longitudinal information following the same group of families and children over time can really enhance what we can see in routine data sets and help us understand why we see particular patterns and what's happening for families and what maybe we can do to make change, what works for families today. So the part that we're going to focus on today, though, is the 3 bits and sort of, I guess that's a lilac colour at the end. So we've had 3 points at which we have engaged with the cohort since they were 2. The most intensive was at 4.5 or 54 months, which was a face-to-face interview with the children. Dads are in there, but actually they weren't there, so that's a mistake. I should have taken that one out last night. But mums and the children were seen, they were measured. We looked at interaction of the children and the parents at that stage, the mother. We also got more consent to link to health and education data. And the 31 and the 45 month were more retention calls, but really important calls, because at that point we were looking at, for example, ECE participation. And we basically have an audit of ECE that is still yet to be completely developed, but will be a really good resource in terms of understanding what has happened for these children throughout their preschool period. So that's where we're focusing today. I think, as Claire said, we talked about a picture or a window of opportunity to look at these children at 4, and that's absolutely the case. So today we're presenting this snapshot, really, and every time we go to the cohort to measure how they're doing, it is like taking a photo of their development. But what we're trying to build up here, if you like, is a video. We're really trying to understand how things evolve. But when we present the first results, certainly like we are today from the children at 4, they do represent an overarching description and snapshot. And hopefully they will actually tempt you, like they tempt us, to say, where to next? What else can we do with this amazing resource? I think one of the things that's been really key to shaping what we're going to present today, as well as shaping the whole cohort, has been the partnerships that we have with government agencies, and Superu have been key to facilitating those while we've been working with them, but also we work with 15 or 16 other government agencies. So throughout the study, it's about collecting evidence that can be used to inform policy. Because actually, in order to do something to improve wellbeing, we think it's really important that we actually understand what's happening for families, for children, and how things are changing for them, out in the real world, if you like. And what that means is that we're moving beyond this idea of just understanding risk factors. So often what we can do with routine data sets, with looking back at a lot of studies, is we're very good at understanding what the risk factors for a particular outcome are, particularly when we look backwards. But actually just understanding the risk factors doesn't always tell us what to do about them. So what we are able to do and add value to some of those routine data sets and looking at those wonderful patterns that we see is to actually understand what's happening at the family and individual level. What is working and how can we intervene to support those families who may be struggling more than others. So some of the ways we like to describe what we can do with this cohort data, and this is what Sarah's going to talk to you about in some detail, is we like to look at change over time. So what's happening in terms of the family situation, what's happening at the societal and political level, but also what are the choices that are being made, because that's something that we can glean from talking directly with the families that we can't always get out of other data sets. So why do people choose to do a particular or to take a particular option in life, or do they have choice, is also a really good question to ask. And this idea of churn is really important. So much now we're looking to identify children who are vulnerable early. The question is, when do you identify them and how do you identify them? Because there's a lot of change over time, and Sarah's going to show you some of that, just looking at the data that exists over the first 5 years for these children. So, what do the children look like at 4, which is what we're here to discuss today? Well, we've collected an awful lot of things about them, and it's quite difficult to put them all in one report. So really what we're going to do is scratch the surface in a way today and show you what's possible, and there's so much more to come. But you can see that there's many, many topics that we try and cover every time we interact with the children. And Sarah's going to highlight some of the key ones for you today and show you what we've found from the cohort. Importantly, let's start with who's in the cohort. Important to just mention again the retention, because part of a longitudinal study is not just recruiting a diverse cohort, but keeping them. And that's quite a challenge in today's environment, particularly as they move around, as you'll see as well. But I think the pleasing thing that we see is over 90% of the children and their families have engaged in this 4.5-year-old interview. And that's really good in international terms. Something about New Zealand and retention, we tend to do it well. So that means that the results we're showing you can be generalisable to other groups and other families with children in the population, which is really important if we're trying to provide evidence to inform policy. Here's just some of the very, very broad sort of characteristics that again build on who are we talking about here. This is the context of all of the results today. You'll see that 1 in 4 of our children are still identified as Māori by their parents by the age of 4.5. 1 in 5 or just over Pacific. 1 in 6 again just over as Asian New Zealanders. We've got this strange and very frustrating category of New Zealander that also is a problem for others, but more people are identifying as New Zealanders, and the people that identify there are not just New Zealand European. Increasingly they're new immigrants who want to be New Zealanders. So that's an interesting category on its own. But you'll see also that 2/3 of the cohort still identify as New Zealand European. And for those of you that can add up, you'll realise that that adds up to much more than 100%, because that's our multiple ethnicity. And that's going to be really interesting as the children start to tell us who they are themselves at the next data collection wave. We're interested in the diversity of the home environment, including the languages and the different environments that children are exposed to. You can see that spoken language, which we were really excited about it too, has changed somewhat. A little bit of a dip in terms of children's ability to actually speak a language rather than just understand. So we hope to see those things start to perhaps stabilise or even go up as the children enter formal schooling. We still see a large number of our children living in deprivation, so 1 in 7 in the most deprived decile. So we'd expect 1 in 10 across the population, so still more in that group than we would see at a population. And that reflects the statistics we see for child poverty generally. And we are seeing children with less childhood illnesses in the year before they're 4.5 than they had at 2, but nevertheless we're seeing a burden of illness that is not equally distributed across our population, and understanding that over time is really important. Almost 9 out of 10 have a sibling by the time they're 4, so most homes have more than one child, which is a bit different than when they were 2. And we also measure them because it's quite important to understand what's happening for these children in terms of their growth, as we know that's a big issue in New Zealand. So just some summary statistics there for you that we'll come back to.
Good morning. It's really fantastic to be here today. And as Susan said, my job is to present you with some of the key findings from the Now We Are 4 report. It's always a privilege, as Susan was saying, to work with the data that's been generated by this unique and diverse cohort. And writing a report like this also, as Susan said, is a real team effort. And I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the broader research team at Growing Up in New Zealand, including Lisa and Caroline, and others that have contributed to the key statistics that we're looking at today. I always find looking at the statistics and Growing Up in New Zealand to be a very personal and humbling experience. Because these statistics are much more than statistics. They're the lived experiences of thousands of New Zealand children. I find that the numbers really get under your skin when you find statistics that tell you that 1/3 of New Zealand children at age 4 are experiencing bullying, or that 1 in 25 children are regularly witnessing violence between their parents, or that 10% of children haven't had an oral health check by the time they're 4. These are statistics that stick with you long after you've shut your laptop down for the day and gone home. I find that they're statistics that make me question and assess our society, and are the statistics that form the evidence we need to create social change. We need to make New Zealand a better place for our children and for their children, and I think, and I hope you see from these statistics today, that this unique and diverse cohort is a great evidence base for us to do that. Around the time of the 4.5-year data collection wave, we had a wonderful group of families volunteer their time, they're cohort families, to give us some time so that we could photograph them and create some snapshot images of preschool life in New Zealand. And this is a really good resource for making PowerPoint slides, as it turns out. And so I've chosen to use these images today to represent some of our key findings. I think ultimately we'd all agree that this is actually a story for the children themselves to tell. The great things about having an antenatal birth cohort is that you can ask parents questions before their child's born. And so we ask them during the antenatal period about intentions and dreams and expectations for their children, and then we can follow up as the children grow and develop and see how those intentions and dreams match the reality that they're then faced with. And one of the questions we asked in the antenatal data collection wave was about the parents' hopes and dreams for their child's life. And as you can imagine, overwhelmingly a theme from parents was that their child would be happy and healthy. And so it's wonderful to report to you today that 97% of the children are in good health and thriving, sometimes in the face of adversity. It's important to note, though, that for 1 in 12 parents, their child's health causes them to worry on a regular basis. And our longitudinal data indicates several areas of opportunity that we can use to provide improved policy or targeted support for families. And a key goal of our longitudinal information is to understand how we can identify health and wellbeing issues at an early stage of life and to provide support for families as their child grows up. So for around 1/3 of parents in the cohort, there were developmental areas of development that were causing concern. Most commonly that was hearing at age 4, with 14% of the parents reporting hearing issues for their children. And that was followed by speech, with around 13% of the families reporting concerns about speech development. And it was really interesting to note in the cohort the way child health impacts on the broader family, with their child's health sometimes limiting time parents have to meet their own needs for 4% of the cohort, or to do or complete activities as a family for 3% of the cohort, or about the decisions that they might make about their own paid employment for 7% of the cohort. As Susan mentioned, one of the other great things about a face-to-face interview is that we can weigh and measure the children ourselves rather than rely on reported data for that information. And so we can see that at 4 years of age, we've got around 14% of the cohort who we would classify using international classification terms as overweight or obese. And that's an increase from 2 years of age when we saw 9% of the cohort overweight or obese. We see and have reported in the report associations between overweight and obesity and the consumption of fizzy drinks, and also the use of and the amount of screen time. And we're looking forward to disentangling those associations in the coming months as we delve deeper into this 4-year data. We'd also note that there's a disparity of overweight and obesity across the cohort in terms of ethnicity, with 1 in 3 Pacific children falling into that category and 1 in 5 Māori children. When we weighed and measured the children, we also asked parents as part of their questionnaire to tell us what they thought of their child's weight. And that's been a really interesting analysis to complete, where we can see that there's actually quite a big gap between parental perception of their child's weight and actual reality. So 10% of parents report to us that they think their child is underweight. In fact, we don't see underweight children in our cohort at all. There are a few, but by the time you do a bit of rounding for your PowerPoint slide, it's 0%. And we see that only 5% of parents would perceive that their child was overweight or obese, whereas in reality, as I said, we're seeing 14%. So I think that that gap between perception and reality raises or causes us to ask questions about our societal norms, about how we apply international standards of obesity to our diverse population, and about how we're going to manage this problem of childhood obesity if, in fact, the parents of young children don't recognise that their child might be overweight or obese. Our parent-reported statistics on oral health are an example of a potential gap between need and service access in New Zealand, where we see that 1 in 10 children haven't had an oral health check by 4 years, and about the same proportion of children are not enrolled in our free dental health service. We compared toothbrushing and oral health hygiene habits or behaviours at 2 and at 4 years of age, and so it's nice to see some of those a bit more regular brushing happening for the 4-year-olds, with most of the cohort, 9 out of 10 children, brushing their teeth at least once a day. But that leaves a group of children within the cohort who aren't brushing their teeth once a day, and some of them report not even once a week. Around 20% of the children at 4 have experienced oral health problems, such as the need for fillings or the removal of teeth. And actually a significant proportion as well have had injuries to their tooth or teeth from playground or other types of injuries. There's so much to look into in terms of screen time in this cohort, in this preschool information, and this is just a snapshot of the key statistic. But compared to 2 years of age, when the children were on average receiving or experiencing about 1.5 hours of screen time per day, we see at 4 that that's increased to a little over 2 hours per day. And as I said before, that amount of time is correlated also with the overweight and obesity statistic, and we'll be looking into that in a lot more detail in the coming months. We also ask about background TV, and for 82% of the children, they're experiencing passive TV in the household on a daily basis, and that's the same statistic that we saw at age 2, so very little change in that household behaviour or that household environment, but some change in the individual behaviour or experience which we can layer on top of that household. We've collected a lot of information about child behaviour, including self-control and temperament and bullying at multiple time points throughout the preschool period. And these multiple measures enable us in a longitudinal manner to look at change, as Susan was saying, change and churn between key behaviours at these time points. And so one of the things we see is that the vast majority of children, 97%, are really good at expressing pro-social behaviours at 4 years of age, and actually they were at 2 years of age as well. So these are measures that talk about being considerate of other people's feelings, helping when somebody is hurt, or being kind to others. And we see really good measures or really good proportion of the children expressing those behaviours at both time points. But when we look at some of the other behaviours around perhaps hyperactivity or conduct or emotional development, we see a lot of change between 2 years and 4 years of age, where children might be expressing a behaviour at 2 years but not at 4, or they might not be expressing it at 2 years but they are at 4. And I think that level of churn really indicates the need to think carefully about how we would identify at-risk children, and when we do identify them, how we would potentially address or remediate any possible behavioural issues. As I mentioned in the introduction, one of the statistics that stuck with me in the development of this report is the statistic about bullying. And it's really concerning to see the report from the OECD recently, which indicated that New Zealand is second worst in the OECD for adolescent bullying, with around 15% of adolescents reporting regular bullying. And our early data as you can see, would indicate that that bullying behaviour starts early, before school. At 4 years of age, we've got 1 in 3 children where their mother is reporting that they're regularly picked on or bullied by other children. And for 10% of the children in the cohort, that happened at age 2 as well. So potentially an experience that's both persistent and frequent for some children. We've collected as well, starting from before birth of the children, information about maternal depression. And we can see at 4 years of age that 1 in 5 mums have experienced, at some point since they were pregnant, an episode or symptoms of depression. And we can see that that's dynamic and prevalent. With some mothers experiencing it on a continual or repeated basis, and others just at one time point, but not any of the others. We do see as well in report in Now We Are 4 that we see slightly higher rates of maternal depression amongst our Māori and Pacific mums. And that information about prevalence and the dynamic nature really gives us some information about how we might support mothers through this period of life. At 4 years of age, we continue to record a large diversity of households and household structures in the cohort, but we do see a smaller number of children living with extended family. In the antenatal period, we had 1 in 4 children living with extended family, and at 4 years of age, we're looking at around 17% of the cohort that are in that household structure. We also see an increase at 4 years of age in the number of children who are living in a sole parent household. And these proportions differ quite dramatically across the major ethnic groups that are represented in the study, with the sole parent households being more common amongst Māori families and the extended family situation being more common in Pacific and also Asian families. Another area that we try to collect a lot of information on through the preschool years is the parenting practices of the families in the cohort. And I guess I apologise because I've picked the most negative statistic that we report in this area in the report, but I thought it was important. On a positive side, we do see that the vast majority of parents are really good at expressing affection for their child, praising their child, and providing comfort to their child. So there's no issues at all there. But I think it is concerning that we're recording 1 in 10 parents who report themselves to use smacking as a method of discipline on a regular basis, and that we've got 1 in 25 children in our cohort witnessing violence between their parents on a regular basis. Thinking about how we might be able to support families in their parenting practices and their household environments, particularly when there might be other stresses or risk factors present, will be a really important use of the resource that we've collected in this cohort. Thinking about residential mobility, and you can see that this presentation is a real straight across the top tour of the Now We Are 4 report, and every one of these topics has a whole lot of questions underneath it that we need to spend more time on to understand the details and the change and the churn, I suppose, of the statistics. But moving now to residential mobility, we see 1 in 2 children have moved house between 2 and 4 years of age, and that's on top of the statistic that 1 in 2 children moved house between 0 and 2 years of age. So we've got quite a large proportion in the cohort who have moved. 1 in 8 children have moved more than 4 times since they were born, and only 1 in 3 children have not moved house by the time they're 4 years of age. I think this rate of residential mobility is a really interesting topic and has implications, as we've commented, on the location and planning of services for preschoolers, and will impact on the transience of the primary school years. And we're looking forward to reporting a little bit more about that in the coming months when we present our transition to school report. Despite these high rates of residential mobility, we don't see much change in tenure. So around half the children, or nearly half the children, living in rented accommodation that statistic has barely budged since the antenatal period. It's moved up and down by no more than 1 or 2% across that period of time. So potentially this is leading us to ask whether we've got or are observing a new generation of lifelong renters. And this obviously has implications for policies that need to be aimed at ensuring families have access to safe, affordable and secure accommodation. When the children were 4 years of age, we saw a big increase in the proportion of mothers that were in paid work by the time their child was this age. We've got 65% of mums reporting they're in paid work when their child is 4, compared to 53% at 2 years of age. And overall, we see for most families an increase in their household income, their total household income. But despite that, we see a large number of families who are still experiencing multiple hardships. These are material hardships, such as continuing to wear shoes with holes in them because replacements cannot be afforded, or putting up with feeling cold to save on heating costs, or using food banks in order to access groceries. This remains common. In addition, 1 in 5 families who are not on any form of income, so wages, salary or business income, are experiencing 5 or 6 of these hardships, so really struggling in a very material way. Another focus of the 4-year data collection wave was to collect information about participation and quality of early childhood education. And particularly we'll be wanting, especially over the next few months when we look at how the children have moved into primary schooling years, looking at how this has contributed to their transition to school. So we saw at 4 years of age that participation in ECE was high. 97% of the children are taking part in some kind of early childhood education. And we'll be reporting in more detail about what type of education that was and what the quality of it was as well. And the rate of participation has increased steadily since the children are 9 months of age. So at 9 months we had around a third of the children in some form of ECE, and at between 2 and 3 years of age we were up to about 60% of the children, and now at 4.5 years of age we've got 97% of the children in ECE, so it's just short of the government target of 98%. We've also collected information about how the parents perceive their school readiness, the children's school readiness, and we see that 6 in 10 parents feel confident that their child had the pre-reading and writing skills needed to start school. That leaves 4 in 10 parents who aren't feeling confident about those aspects of their child's early childhood preparation. And 9 in 10 parents felt confident that their child was socially ready to start school. In terms of the home learning environment, at 4 years of age, we had around 60% of the parents reporting reading books with their children every day, and slightly smaller percentages, but still substantial, telling stories or singing songs and creating music with their children every day at 4 years of age. So I'm going to shortly hand back over to Susan. What I've given you is an overview of the key findings that we have presented in the Now We Are For report. There's so much more to understand, and so I hope that those statistics act as a teaser for you. If you have further research questions, we'd be very happy to work with you and to try and understand those. I hope some of the statistics have get under your skin, like they have for me. And I thought it would be appropriate to finish with an example of hopes and dreams. This is a quote from a participant at 4.5 years of age. And at the next data collection wave, as Susan's going to describe, we're really interested in finding out from the children themselves about what their hopes and dreams are. And we've piloted last year. I'll just tell this quick anecdote and let Susan carry on from there. But at the when we piloted our Leading Light group last year, we did ask the children what they wanted to be when they grow up, and one child does want to be a hedgehog. So we do think it will be very interesting to carry on and hear the voices of the children in the next stage of this study. So I'll leave it there and hand back to Susan.
As Sarah said, just scratching the surface really, but I hope you've seen some real potential in some of those statistics, and I think the fact that we've been able to use the photos of the children themselves to help us tell their stories is really special, so thank you for that. I just wanted to put this finally into sort of a context, the longitudinal context, because as Claire has said at the beginning, this is a snapshot, but we are looking at using these results in a longitudinal way to understand what shapes development over time and how we understand how our children are going to grow up and what shapes their future and therefore all of our futures. So the first thing to say is that there is so much more to do from these early analyses, and this report represents a beginning. It's really the descriptive study with some delving into some of the longitudinal and some of the churn issues that we speak about, but there's more to do on that, and that's probably the case as this information builds up over time. The questions to be asked of it are almost endless, so there really is a rich resource to be used there. We'll also be looking at further linkage to some of the big data sets. That wasn't called that when we started, but it's now one of the things that's actually taking up a lot of time. And as I said at the beginning, those big data sets are wonderful in terms of telling us about the whole population and giving us this wonderful picture of what is happening for that population at multiple levels. But what we can add to that is a real depth, an understanding of what's happening over time, and really add a dimension. So I'll give you an example of that in a moment. The next report, as Sarah described, is the transition to school report. That will be really important, and I'll talk to you briefly about a couple of teasers that are coming out of that, just to give you a sense of where we're going. And obviously one of the key things that we're working towards this year, and very soon we'll be in the field with our main cohort data collection wave when the children are 8. And the great advantage of that, as I think you've probably heard today, is that we will hear the voices of the children themselves, and that's going to be really, really exciting, whether they want to be a hedgehog or a ballet dancer or whatever they want to be. So many more things that they'll be able to tell us about themselves and their lives. External data sets, incredibly important from the beginning. We've been determined to use this as a resource and make this resource available for others to utilise as well, and that's something we'll be building on tomorrow when we have a workshop to release the 54-month data set. So the very data that you've heard about today will be available for others to ask questions of as well. So that's something that we remain excited about, and there are lots of different ways to engage with that information. So as I just elaborate on a couple of those things just very briefly, the first thing to say is that a bit like the Now We Are 2, where instead of just having a Now We Are, or before we are born and a Now We Are born, we had a Now We Are 2 descriptive report, and then we had 3 further reports that looked at vulnerability and also looked at residential mobility, so 2 reports on vulnerability. We anticipate that out of this there will also be another series of reports that go into detail, certainly about vulnerability, so vulnerability and resilience is something that we're already looking at. Quite devastating to see some of the impacts of exposure to cumulative disadvantage through the first 1,000 days for these children, 21 times the risk of them having health and development problems compared to those children who experience no risks at all. So that's just a teaser, but a lot more to come, and a lot more work to do on resilience, because of course not all children exposed to cumulative disadvantage do poorly. So we're interested in what works as well to find new ways to address that. But also residential mobility will be an important one, picking up on this idea that only 1 in 3 of the whole cohort have not experienced a move in their preschool years. So that is huge mobility and quite different than we've seen for other generations, and really challenges us when we think about delivery of services and meeting the needs of these families in the community. So those are the things that will be coming, we hope, over the next few months, and we look forward to discussing suggestions about those for ourselves, but also for others who may be interested in looking at these things. We are delving into obesity, as we must. I think this is a huge issue for New Zealand, both in terms of our current generation of children, but also in terms of the potential impacts in the future. So we work with the National Science Challenge Group, looking at using the Growing Up resource to understand what is shaping obesity, no pun intended, for our children. We can look over time. It's interesting when you just use the before school check, for example, that it starts to look like maybe we're seeing some changes, and maybe there's even a downward trend in some of the statistics for 4-year-olds, but when you follow children over time, the same children, you actually see increases in rates. And I think one of the reasons for that is also because when you look at the before school check, when we use the Growing Up data alongside that, you see that there are a significant number of children who do not engage with the before school check. So we're just working through that process now, and we'll hope to have a really detailed paper out on that. But it's clear that it's most likely to be our Māori, our Pacific and our most vulnerable children who are not engaging in that before school check. So if we only rely on those statistics to tell us about our 4-year-olds, we're missing our most vulnerable population and probably underrepresenting some of the issues that we're trying to deal with. So that's an important piece of work that's ongoing. We're also working with different groups who are looking at subsets of this cohort, and that's really important. So one key area we've been looking at is the Southern Initiative. That's a group of people in South Auckland who are looking at the mums and the children who fit into that group of families who live in the Southern Auckland area, so defined by a geographic area where 1,200 of the cohort live. And they are most likely to be at high risk of experiencing vulnerability and multiple adversity. And what we've done is looked at that vulnerability profile for those children in that area, but also looked at what can mitigate some of those things. What works at a family and community level to potentially change some of those statistics for children. And we've got some living examples now where that work is being translated into community initiatives that are built on the idea that reading and spending quality time with your child is good for your children. So there are initiatives in the community built on the research that's come out of this work, as well as the idea of having community spaces where young mums or mums of any age and their families can congregate and support each other. So some of the things that have come out of the findings are leading to real change in the community. And that's really exciting, and we hope to continue that work with this 4.5-year and later data. As Sarah said, as I mentioned earlier, the next report that will be coming out before the end of the year will be looking at how these children have done in terms of transitioning to school. So you saw from Sarah's slides that we have asked mums about how they feel about their children's readiness for school. We've also done some of the before school checks with them ourselves so that we can compare how ready they are according to those measures. But one of the things that we are going to follow up then is what has been not only the completion rate for before school check, but what has its utility been? So if children have been identified in that preschool period as having issues at before school check, what has happened subsequently and has it made a difference to the trajectory? So that'll be one of the things that we will be asking of the information that we get at that point. But also this idea of mobility we'll be able to look at in more detail. And we're only just scratching the surface of looking at this data, but I think one of the statistics that we just wanted to tempt you with is that 12% of the children between the age of 5 and 6 have shifted school. So that is huge. So we've got a lot more work to do on that, but that suggests that this group of children and families continue to be mobile. And the biggest reason for that shift is actually because they've shifted house. So it's not stopping when school starts, and that's probably what we might have expected to happen. So I think exploring that in more detail is going to be really interesting as well. So that'll be a report later this year. So then I think the other thing we've talked a little bit about, not much about change and choice and churn, although those are the things that underlie a lot of the more detailed work and some of the analyses that you'll see when you go into the report, but also this idea of voice. So you heard Sarah talk about the aspirations that the parents have for their children at 4, and that builds on the information that we had when those children were not yet born. So we had aspirations or hopes and dreams that you may have seen some work out on from the parents even before they were born. And I think mostly that's good. There's some exciting things coming out of that, but there's also a tinge of sadness in that you see some of the families, so 99% of the families in pregnancy were really optimistic about their child's future and what the future held for them and how they could develop to be happy and healthy and have much better lives than their parents. By 4.5, unfortunately, we start to see a bit of disparity in that, so that those children who've been in families exposed to more disadvantage are starting to limit some of those aspirations and expectations. And that's kind of sad, because we don't want those children to have boundaries. We want them to still believe that they can be who they dreamed they would be and who their parents dreamed they would be. And that's, I guess, our job, is to say, how can we make that happen for these groups? So that leads me on to the other big piece of work that we're currently doing, which is to go into the field with the 8-year data collection for these children, to follow them up at the time that they are well into primary school for most children. Most children are in formal schooling. There's a small percentage who are homeschooled, so we're following them as well. But I think the really interesting thing here at 8 is to hear the children's voices for the first time, as we've said. We'll be able to see how they're doing behaviourally as well as cognitively. We've got a really exciting tool that's going to check their te reo ability, the first one of its kind in the world, to be able to see how our children are doing with te reo. So not just a report from their mums and dads, but actually a test, if you like, for all the children. We can also ask the children themselves how they feel about their own selves, really, their image, their body image, their gender identity, and how they think that others perceive them. So that really personal sort of question that we can't necessarily get from statistics. And also ask them about how they feel about their peer relationships, their friendships, what the experience of bullying might mean to them, if it's actually happening to them or if they've observed it in others. So understanding that from the children's perspective. As well as the things that we've mentioned earlier that are still important, so their anthropometry, their screen time, their physical activity, their nutrition, so many things to check up on with the children. So they will be the focus of the 8 year. And then the mums will continue to be able to tell us about those other layers of environments which continue to be important. So the mums' voices and their choices also important at that point, including their aspirations, and let's hope we see an upturn in those.
Yes, kia ora, Liz Gordon from Ototahi, Christchurch. I flew up this morning. I've got one very brief question, and that is how many of the children are not living with one of their parents? And a slightly longer question, I was really interested in that tantalising little graph about incomes that seems to show that there's an income unequalisation process going on. The poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. And I wondered how much you drill down on that in particular. I know that the census shows huge income gaps between dual parents and sole parent incomes. Obviously, there's the gender pay gap and the benefit gap and the this and that, and how much you've done any work on that and its implications. So a short question and a long question. Kia ora.
Okay. I'll have a go and then let Susan fix it up.
Or not.
Second question first, because I can't recall the first one. So the incomes, we haven't yet adjusted those incomes for number of individuals living in the house, so we do have a lot more work on the income and how that's impacting the family. So we are seeing an increase in household income, but we've also got to equivalise those for other household members. And your first question?
It's about children without parents.
Oh, okay. Okay, I don't think I can give a really quick answer to that. We've got around 4% of the cohort where we know they're living in a house with another adult who's not kin to them. And we know we've got a small number of children living in, so they're sort of hidden, I guess, in the extended family and the non-kin categories of statistics at the moment. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, we've also got some parallel work, and Lisa's here, who's the expert in this space, in the Who Are Today's Dads. So we do know quite a lot about dads who are not the biological dads and non-resident dads. Similarly, we know that there are children from the beginning who are not living with a biological mother, for example, let alone a biological dad. So they've been adopted either formally or they've been whangai'd, other arrangements. Some are in SIFS care, small number. So we actually track that in something called the household grid, and that's a whole piece of work to actually disentangle those changes in and out, who's in the household, but it's a really important question. So those numbers are increasing over time, as you'd expect, as are the numbers of solo parents, mostly mums, 98%. If there are children living with only one parent, it tends to be mum at this age. But obviously the children are still young. Yeah, so we can definitely look at that in more detail for you.
I just want to know, you've got some stats there about not attending before school checks, and I was a little late, so sorry I didn't hear everything else. Have you been asking questions about why people might not access these things that are available for them?
Yes, so that's an area of work that's ongoing at the moment, and what we're doing is linking up the self-reported data that we had from the families about their engagement with, in this case, before school check, but other services as well. And then we've linked now with consent to the before school check data later, in case some of the reason we didn't link was because the children hadn't yet had their check. But we do then ask about choice. So has there been an active choice to not engage, or has it just been that they haven't got there yet but they're intending to? And if they have, then why? So those things are definitely available and being looked at right now in terms of disentangling what's going on, so that we can understand how we make that service, if you like, meet the needs of the families better and engage with them better on in terms of what they are expecting out of it. I think the other part of it that's going to be interesting is looking at what the utility of those sort of child checks are for those families. So if they have engaged in that check and they've been given a referral, so basically a screening that's led to a referral on for more assessment, what's happened as a result of that. And just an anecdote, again, to maybe whet your appetite from our 8-year Leading Light group, so the group that we saw last year. We asked particularly about obesity and overweight, given that it is such an important topic at the moment, and asked if mums had received any information, if their children had been classified in that way, and what they did with that information and why. And parents said that in general, yes, they had received some information, but most of them did nothing with it because they thought it was a load of rubbish, and it wasn't what their family and friends told them, and it wasn't the information source they trusted. So, that is why we keep going back to say, well, what works for you? What is it that's actually going to make a difference? Because sometimes we just don't know. That will be coming out, yes. So that's under development at the moment in terms of the before school check, certainly looking at the match between the growing up and the routine statistics, because I think that's really critical, because that before school check is being used so widely as a representative group of our 4-year-olds at the moment, and actually there are some coverage issues and some biases in terms of those that we're seeing who are not included in those statistics, and I think it's really important that we work out what that is so we can use that data set well.
Claire Stewart from IHC. Just a question in terms of children with developmental delayed disabilities, represented in the proportions that you'd expect to see them in your sample group?
Yes, I think so. Lisa might chip in. So we've seen the rates of autism, for example, that we would see in the wider population, and same with just overall developmental delay. We see approximately the rates that we would expect to see in our population and the rates that have been reported in other cohorts around the world. So we have captured the diversity of that development.
I'm just interested in, are you looking at self-control among these children as a measure of how they're going to turn out? Would you be able to just expand a little bit on that? You didn't mention it in your talk.
I know when I said the phrase self-control, I realised I didn't make a slide about self-control actually. At 4.5 years, we did this, we conducted an observation task with the children that we call the gift wrap task, for want of a better name, where the children were asked to complete an activity where they were asked to turn around while the interviewer wrapped a gift for them, and the interviewer recorded in a period of 60 seconds how many times the child turned around and peeked. They were asked not to look, and then recorded how many times they did turn around and look. So we have that measure of self-control, which shows I think around 70% of the children don't look while the gift has been wrapped, and 30% of them do. So that will be one measure of self-control, and we will build on that in the 8-year data collection wave with both questions to mum and the child, as well as a task. Is it? No. Yes. Yeah.
I think one of the things that Sarah did mention is though that some of the other behavioural measures that are associated with things like self-control or just self-regulation that we measure at both 2 and 4.5, the thing that we're seeing is, again, quite a bit of churn. So around about 33 or 25%, I think, of the children will change from what might be classified as a problem behaviour to a non-problem behaviour, or vice versa. So I think what that is telling us is we have to be quite cautious about when we identify these children, because actually the children at 2 are not necessarily the children at 4.5, and there are some things that are happening in terms of natural flux that we need to work through versus those who are persistently showing issues. And so that again is part of the work ongoing to say, can we do better to really identify those children who are most at risk versus those who are potentially just going through a developmental stage that will remedy itself. Otherwise, I think some of the ways that we may be thinking about this may stigmatise children that we don't need to stigmatise, and so it's actually really important to do.
I've got a question. Kia ora koutou. You talked about the Te Reo Māori, I think it was assessment or test. Is it a test based on to identify proficiency, or does it seek to identify connection with culture, for example?
That's a really good question. So there are lots of ways that we're measuring this, but the one that I was referring to is one we've developed with the Māori Language Commission, and it is actually to assess people's ability to engage in a te reo, to understand and to engage in te reo conversation. So it's quite novel in that regard. But alongside that, part of asking the children about their own identity is very much about what it means to them. And we've asked those questions of the parents as well. So it's not just which group do you identify with, it's what does it mean to you, and how do you live that out in your everyday lives? And we also ask questions around discrimination for everybody, so we can then dissect it out according to some of those other answers. So hopefully it's a rich look at what culture and identity means for this generation.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Sarah. I've got a question. What proportion of the children are firstborn in the family? I'm asking this in the context of whether you were doing anything in terms of understanding the pecking order of the
Yeah, I know. Well, Susan and I are both firstborn, so...
42%.
But yeah, so I was going to say it's around 40% of the children are firstborns in the study, and that is an area of interest that we will follow up. Yeah.
Kia ora again. I'm Leonie Brunt from the Health Promotion Agency. So I was interested in the question around before schools checks, and appreciate that the influences are often friends and family, and that the information they receive might not have been their trusted source. Did their trusted sources start to emerge? Was there any questions around that?
Yes, so we've asked about sources of health information and which ones you trusted the most before, and they do emerge. We ask about all the sources of information you've received and which one do you trust the most, and it varies across the cohorts. It varies in particular with ethnicity, I think, parental ethnicity. For some groups, family and friends are really important, and other groups rely more on a GP or a primary health carer. And it is really diverse and interesting. But the family and friends is often a really important source of information for parents, particularly with relation to their health, child's health. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, maybe we can give an example from immunisation, which we've done quite a lot of work on now. So obviously the drive to decrease the disparities we see, I guess, in immunisation rates and completion and timeliness of immunisation across our population, despite the overall higher rates that we are seeing now. It's become really important to see the part that dads play in that, as well as potentially extended family. And when we think about using that sort of information that Sarah's referred to, it's a question of, do we just blame the mum, or have we got another potential here to include the wider family in terms of supporting decisions? Because what we saw with immunisation decisions is that if dad was not committed to immunisation, for example, even if mum was, there was much less likelihood that that child would be immunised on time and receive complete immunisations, even if mum was deeply committed to that in pregnancy and later. So I think there are opportunities, I guess, here to say, you know, it's not just about mum and baby. There are other people that these people trust, and how do we include them in supporting mums to do what they say they would like to do with their children? How do we wrap support around them, I guess?
Me to thank both Susan and Sarah for doing a great job at just, as they say, giving us a snapshot of what's going on, but I think they gave us a really good coverage of some key findings that we should start to be looking at and learn more about. So I found there was lots of really interesting and relevant information in there. And it's great to see that a large majority of our families and children are doing well, because you can get sucked into the negative statistics. But it's also true, as the team has shown, that many are not, and that's concerning. So we shouldn't just dwell on the negative, and we should look at the positive, but the negative is important as well. So thank you for giving us that balance. And it just remains for me really to encourage you in all your jobs, whether you're working in policy and funding or delivering services to these, you know, families, that I encourage you to use this information and evidence in your thinking. As one of the parents said, as one of the parents said in the little clip at the end, it's really important that we base our decisions on evidence, not anecdote. And growing up in New Zealand is a fantastic source of evidence alongside many other things. So I suppose my challenge and encouragement to you and your colleagues is that we do use this evidence that we have, and that we try to understand what it tells us. We look at what other things are telling us and use evidence in our decision making rather than anecdotes. So I think I'll just finish there with that call to action. As I say, thank you to Susan and Sarah and the wider team, and also to Annette, the General Manager, who is doing a great job, I think, in connecting the team to Wellington, which I think is a great thing too. Thank you to the Superu team, who work hard with the Growing Up team, and thank you for all coming along. Tēnā koutou katoa.